Hello, and welcome to this brief overview of the 2026 Toronto Child and Family Poverty Report. This year's report is called Advancing the Promise for Toronto's Children, and it's a unique report because it's a municipal election edition. My name is Sharma Quaiser, and I'm a researcher and policy analyst at Social Planning Toronto, and one of the authors on the report. This year's report was produced in partnership with Campaign 2000. Campaign 2000 is a cross-Canada nonpartisan coalition committed to ending child and family poverty. For this report, we used the most recent taxfiler data based on 2023 incomes to examine child and family poverty trends in Toronto. We also used data from the 2021 census to look at the experiences of child poverty amongst Indigenous, racialized, and immigrant families. Before we begin, I'd like to give a land acknowledgement. Social Planning Toronto honors the land that we are on and the current stewards of this land, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, as established through Treaty 13. As well, in addition to the Anishinaabeg, we acknowledge the Wendat and the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, who have also occupied this territory. This land is subject to the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement between the Anishinaabeg and the Haudenosaunee to peacefully share and care for the land and its resources. Other Indigenous nations and all settlers, including all of us, are invited into this covenant in the spirit of respect, peace, and friendship. Many of us have come here as settlers, immigrants, or newcomers in this generation or past generations. We acknowledge those of us who have come here involuntarily, particularly as a result of the transatlantic slave trade. And so we honor and pay tribute to the ancestors of African origin and descent also. Today, Toronto, now known as Toronto, is home to many Indigenous nations from across Turtle Island, including the Inuit and the Métis. We are mindful of broken covenants and strive to make this right with the land and with each other. And as we share this land acknowledgement, it's also important to recognize that the high poverty rates experienced by Indigenous children and families today are not accidental. They are the direct result of historical and ongoing processes of colonization, including land dispossession, discriminatory policies, and unequal access to economic opportunities. Naming this context reminds us why and how Indigenous communities continue to face disproportionate hardship and why meaningful reconciliation must include addressing systemic ongoing inequities. So before we dive into the research findings, I'd like to present a little overview of the current context. As I'm sure many of you are aware, Toronto residents are facing multiple intersecting challenges which affect their daily lives. Issues like unemployment, low wages, inadequate OW and ODSP rates, unaffordable or inaccessible childcare, food insecurity, and unaffordable housing make it difficult to make ends meet in this city. The number of children relying on food banks, for example, has increased by 154% since 2019, and children now make up 1 in 4 food bank users in Toronto. There are approximately 17,600 children on the waiting list for a child care fee subsidy. And as we can see on the call out on the left, a single parent with 1 child receiving Ontario Works and the Ontario Child Benefit gets just over $1,000 a month. That's about 1/3 of the poverty line. So we know that ODSP and OW keep families in poverty. At the same time, it's important to acknowledge the work that has been done to reduce poverty and support low-income residents. Since the City of Toronto passed its poverty reduction strategy in 2015, it has introduced many initiatives focused on reducing poverty and supporting low-income residents. These include creating affordable housing, tenant support programs, childcare supports, and TTC programs, such as the Fair Pass discount program, free transit for children 12 and under, and the forthcoming fare capping. The City of Toronto has also done a massive expansion of its student nutrition program, striving to make it a universal program. For example, in 2026, the city budget included a $6 million investment to expand student nutrition program to reach an additional 62,000 students. Additional city initiatives include adopting frameworks focused on inclusive economic development and community benefits, enhancing library hours. So as of this summer, all 100 library branches will operate 7 days a week, totaling 323,187 hours. There has also been support for strategies that focus on Indigenous and Black communities and youth equity. We also saw increased funding for community organizations and on food security and other initiatives. So that was an overview of some of the challenges facing Toronto and a few of the important ways that the city is responding to these issues. Now we will move into providing some information about the key findings from the report. This graph shows the child poverty rates for Toronto from 2004 to 2023. Child poverty steadily declined from about 2014, 2015 until 2020. This decline has been largely attributed to the introduction of the Canada Child Benefit. The sharpest decline was seen from 2019 to 2020, when pandemic benefits provided a significant but temporary drop in poverty. From 2001 to 2023, child poverty increased each year, and now it's back at levels last seen in 2017. What we can learn from the data on this graph is that reductions in child poverty are possible, but it requires government investment, notably in the form of income supports, and those investments need to be sustained. So in 2023, 1 in 4, or 25.7% of children aged 0 to 17 in Toronto experienced poverty. Most recently, from 2022 to 2023, child and family poverty in Toronto rose for the third year in a row, increasing by 0.4 percentage points. 0.4 percentage points is in line with the provincial increase, but it's double what we saw at the national level. And although this sounds like a small increase, it represents 1,800 more children living in poverty. This graph shows the poverty rates for each of Canada's largest cities. So these are all cities, urban areas with populations of 500,000 or more. And as you can see on this graph, Toronto has the highest child poverty rate at 25.7%. This is followed by Winnipeg at 23.6% and the region of Peel at 21.7%. Toronto's child poverty rate is also higher than the provincial statistic of 19.9% and the national statistic of 18.3%. We also looked at the child poverty rate for families based on family composition. And on this graph, you can see that one-parent families have the highest child poverty rate. The child poverty rate of 50.8% for one-parent families is almost triple the child poverty rate for couple families at 17.2%. And it is about double the overall child poverty rate for all census families at 25.3%. We know from other research that consistently shows higher poverty rates for children in one-parent families headed by women compared to those headed by men. So there is certainly a gender component to this statistic. We also know from research and community that women are more likely to head one-parent families, face wage gaps and earn less, and experience unstable work environments. So all of these things contribute to the higher poverty rates for one-parent families, particularly those headed by women. We also found that 98.7% of children who are not part of a census family experience poverty. This represents about 2,210 children in Toronto. Although this population makes up a very small portion, only 1.8% of those under the age of 18 living in a low-income household, this statistic is very concerning. The taxfiler data does not give us a lot of information about this group. However, we know that it includes minors who have some reported income and live alone or with people who are not their parent, grandparent, married or common law partner, or their own children. The 2021 census provides a little bit more information about these children in non-census families. About 73% of them live with relatives other than their parents and grandparents. 23% of them live with non-relatives, and only about 4% of them live alone. So again, this is a stark statistic, and one of the recommendations we've included in our report is to do more research to really understand the circumstances of these children in order to support them in overcoming these experiences of poverty. We also look at depth of poverty, or how far below the poverty line families fall. So on this graph, it shows depth of poverty. The gray area shows the poverty line, which changes based on family composition. So for example, this first bar here has a poverty line of $37,395, and that's for one parent with one child, or a two-person family. The next bar here has a poverty line of 45,799, and that's for a couple with one child, or a three-person family. So as you can see, the gray line areas represent the poverty line. The blue areas down below represent the median after-tax family income for this low-income family type. So the median after-tax family income for a one-parent family with one child is $22,240. So that means that they are living $15,155 below the poverty line. So that's how much money, additional money, they would need to have in order just to make it to the poverty line. So one-parent families with two children have the largest gap of $16,899. This was followed by one-parent families with one child who have a median after-tax income of $15,155 below the poverty line. The next graph shows some related data. So this shows depth of poverty by family type over time. So it shows depth of poverty from 2015, when the City of Toronto introduced its poverty reduction strategy, to 2023. What we can see from this graph is during this time period, depth of poverty increased for all family types. The poverty gap more than doubled for low-income one-parent families with 1 and 2 children, as well as couples with 2 children. This type of data is important to look at and important to understand because living in deeper poverty means that many families are struggling to meet their basic needs. They often have to choose between rent versus food or food versus transportation. Families living in deeper poverty also face greater barriers to stability and improving their financial situations. At the same time, from a policy perspective, it means that improvements to address income security and affordability that are incremental aren't enough to make a real difference in these people's lives. Inflationary increases and small increases are not enough to bring these families to or ideally above the poverty line. Next, we're going to look at the experience of family poverty by geography. This image shows Toronto's poverty rates by ward. 9 of Toronto's 25 wards had a child poverty rate of 30% or more. So you can see that with the darker colors, they have the higher child poverty rates. The lighter colors have the lower child poverty rates. Toronto Centre had the highest child poverty rate of 36.1%, followed by Humber River Black Creek at 35.0%, and Scarborough Guildwood at 34.0%. Parkdale High Park had the lowest child poverty rate of 15.3%. We can also look at poverty rates by census tracts, or smaller geographical areas. In 2023, 43 census tracts had a child poverty rate of 40% or higher. Many of the census tracts with the highest rates of child poverty are concentrated in Toronto's inner suburbs, particularly the northwest part of the city, Scarborough, and the downtown core. So you can see from this map that child poverty by census tract follows that familiar U shape that we often see when we look at poverty trends. Analysis of poverty rates by census tracts is important because it reveals stark concentrations of extreme poverty, which can be obscured by local ward level data. For example, the census tract with the highest rate of poverty was 61.3%, and that was within Don Valley West. Compare this to the ward level data we saw in the previous slide. Toronto Centre had the highest poverty rate of 36.1%. Don Valley West ward had a child poverty rate of 26.7%. Using the 2021 census data, we also saw that child poverty continues to disproportionately affect some communities. 20.4% of Indigenous children in Toronto experience poverty compared to 14.5% of non-Indigenous children. 17.8% of racialized children in Toronto experience poverty. That's almost double the poverty rate of non-racialized children. And some specific racialized groups have even higher rates of poverty, including Arab, West Asian, Black, Latin American, Korean, and Southeast Asian children. Immigrant children had a child poverty rate of 21.0 compared to 12.6 for non-immigrant children. Families who do not have permanent resident status experience the highest child poverty rate at 42.6%. These gaps show how systemic barriers continue to shape which communities are most affected by poverty. Next, we'll dive into the recommendations of the report. This report includes recommendations for all three levels of government, organized under three key approaches to reducing child and family poverty. The first approach focuses on ensuring livable incomes and supporting inclusive economic development practices so that families have the stability and opportunities they need to thrive. We recommend that the City of Toronto support the conditions and pathways for communities and workers to build wealth. So this includes community ownership through mechanisms like community land trusts, workers' cooperatives, and credit unions. We also recommend that the City of Toronto maximize the potential of their recently launched Inclusive Economic Development Framework. This includes improving access to decent employment and entrepreneurship opportunities, supporting living wage jobs, and expanding Toronto's fair wage policy. At the provincial level, we're calling for the province of Ontario to immediately double Ontario Works and Ontario Disability Support Program rates. We're also calling for Ontario to raise its minimum wage to at least $20 an hour or more and strive for a living wage. At the federal level, we have called for the Government of Canada to create a non-taxable Canada Child Benefit and Child Poverty Supplement. So this is a recommendation that was put forward by our partners at Campaign 2000, and it is a income supplement specifically targeted to families experiencing deep poverty. We've also called on the federal government to develop a national housing benefit standard that largely mirrors the design of Manitoba's Rent Assist program. This is a recommendation put forward first by our partners at Maitre Foundation. And basically, it calls for a housing benefit that ensures that eligible households spend no more than 30% of their income on housing. The second approach to reducing poverty in our recommendations is to implement a rights-based approach to basic needs and affordability. This includes expanding deeply affordable housing, increasing access to public and nonprofit childcare, and strengthening tenant and rental protections. We also call on the federal government or the provincial government to sign a 5-year Canada-wide early learning and childcare agreement. So unlike most other provinces, the province of Ontario only signed a 5-year or 1-year extension rather than a 5-year agreement. At the same time, we're also calling for the federal government to make sure that the next 5-year phase of CWELC is adequately funded. We're also looking for the province of Ontario to increase non-market housing and to support tenants by restoring vacancy control and removing the 2018 rent control exemption. At the federal level, we're looking for the Government of Canada to ensure that federally financed housing is deeply affordable for low-income families. So this is about ensuring that housing developments that receive federal money has some incentive to be affordable. The third approach and final approach in our recommendations is about renewing the focus on poverty reduction and systemic inequity. At the city level, this means investing more in neighborhoods with high child poverty rates, setting clear targets, and publicly tracking progress. For the provincial level, we are calling for the province to commit to reducing poverty rates by 50% by 2028. So this is an expedited target that we've also called on the federal government to commit to. At the provincial level, we're also recommending that the province increase funding for nonprofit and public organizations that directly work with families. And on to the final part of the presentation, ward profiles and election engagement. So this is kind of the action piece of our report. And as I mentioned, this report is a little bit different because this year is a municipal election year. Included in the report, we have developed ward profiles for each of the City of Toronto's 25 wards. On this slide, you can see what is included in each ward profile, which I'll go over with you in this example. So here we have an example of a ward profile. In this case, it's Etobicoke North. Each ward profile is 2 pages long, and the first page, as you can see on the left, includes all of the data. So first we have a map of the ward, and it is divided by census tracts. So you can see the child poverty rate for all of the census tracts in the ward. The darker colors have higher child poverty rates, and the lighter colors have lower child poverty rates. Below the map, you can see a call out with the overall child poverty rate for that ward. In this case, it's 33.2%. And below that is a call out with the highest child poverty rate within the ward that's based on census tract data. So the census tract with the highest child poverty rate is 47.2% right here. And finally, here in the bottom right corner, you can see a small graph that has ward level poverty rates versus citywide poverty rates. And this is for all age groups. So not just the children 0 to 17, we also have the poverty rates for the total population, for the population 18 to 24, and for the senior population 65 plus. And then on the second page of the ward profile is a street map, which shows kind of the boundaries of the ward, and you can kind of line it up based on the different streets, with an inset map that shows where that ward is located with respect to the City of Toronto. So in addition to that, and as a complementary tool, we developed a Find Your Ward website. So there's an interactive ward map where you can go to this website listed here and enter in your address, and it will tell you which ward that you live in. And then below it, you can scroll down and select the appropriate ward profile. As I noted earlier, the municipal election is this year on October 26th. So in addition to the ward profiles, we have developed a take action sheet. The take action sheet includes questions you can ask your candidates in your ward related to child and family poverty. We've proposed 3 questions you can ask. The first one is, Toronto is the child and family poverty capital of Canada. What will you do to reduce child and family poverty in our city? And how we make sure it actually happens. So this is a broad citywide question with an accountability component. The second question we proposed is, poverty affects families throughout the city, but some neighborhoods and communities experience greater hardship. How will you ensure targeted investments reach the communities that need them most? So this is a really localized question that tries to get at the candidates' understanding and use of the ward profiles and to understand where their priorities are. Finally, we have a third question, which is, will you commit to implementing specific actions such as, and then you can choose from the recommendation listed in the report or maybe something else that you're aware of to reduce child and family poverty. So this is about kind of gauging candidates' interest and commitment to things that are near and dear to your heart. So these 3 questions are really open-ended questions about engaging dialogue between candidates and residents and organizations. The Take Action sheet also has these links, a link to the full report, a link to where you can find out the list of candidates for your ward, and a timeline on the election. So again, when you can apply to vote by mail, September 1 to 24. Advanced polls are October 6 to 11, and election day is October 26. So these two slides here are on a PDF that you can access on our website. Thank you so much for joining in to the Child and Family Poverty Report Card 2026 Toronto brief overview. I hope you found this helpful. And again, I really encourage you to go to our website, socialplanningtoronto.org, to read the full report, find out the detailed recommendations that we put forward, and take a look at how child poverty affects families in your ward.